there's truth to everything he's saying. And you end up absolutely missing the major reasons as to why America keeps finding itself in war and destabilization plots all the time. We're going to talk to our friend of the show, Johnny Harris. He made a video about how 9/11 was used to sell a war. Now, do I believe that Johnny Harris will get into the nitty-gritty of the actual, lead up to 9/11? Probably not, because some of those are still in the this is a conspiracy theory territory. Maybe he will. Who knows? But Johnny Harris probably has an anti-Iraq war, anti-Afghan war, possibly anti-Iraq war, maybe not an anti-Afghanistan war take on it, because he always has this perspective. He always has this this was a bad war. It was not justified. So let's cover that type of attitude, as I've talked about time and time again. But this time, this is different. Lots of libs are pro-Afghan invasion. Yeah, I know. But anyway, here's Johnny Harris.
In the summer of 2002, the director of the British intelligence agency MI6, Richard Dearlove, traveled to Washington, D.C. to meet with the director of the CIA, George Tenet. The topic of the meeting was Iraq and its leader, Saddam Hussein. In the meeting, the CIA director shared classified information with his...
Yeah, he's not going to talk about Afghanistan. I think he's just going to talk about how, they sold... Are you not mad at Johnny anymore for his Joe Rogan video? No, I will never forgive and never forget that fucking Joe Rogan video was so bad. It's just that, he's doing the classic thing of the Iraq war was bad, which is well established. Fucking Republicans are anti-Iraq war, man. Come on. Johnny Harris is going to talk about how the Iraq war was sold on a lie, okay, without factoring in why 9/11 happened, I'm sure that's a more comprehensive video, but he's going to talk about how 9/11 was used to sell the Iraq war, and Donald Trump ran on being anti-Iraq war and bludgeoned Hillary over the side of the fucking head with that. So I'm sorry, this is a universal position, okay? That's not bravery at that point. I'm glad that Americans have finally come around to that, okay? But, that's not exactly a brave, bold take at all.
His British counterpart, who then traveled back to London to 10 Downing Street, the home of the Prime Minister, Tony Blair. Dearlove told his Prime Minister everything about what was really happening behind the scenes in the United States. How the US was planning to invade Iraq no matter what. It was a highly classified meeting, but notes were taken and classified and put into a memo. That memo was later leaked to British author and journalist Michael Smith, who published it in 2005. And that's what we're looking at. A secret meeting, and the memo it produced, meant only for the eyes of top British officials. It was an explosive leak. What we see is that Dearlove tells his Prime Minister everything he heard in Washington a few days earlier, and that this was a very different story than the one the Bush administration was telling to the public. That an American invasion was inevitable, that Bush's people were fixated on removing Saddam Hussein from power, no matter what, and that the US government was blatantly cooking up intel and facts to help sell their invasion. This document shows us how power really works in our world. How a small group of people decided to topple a dictator, to occupy a country, and then invented a story to support their plan. It was a false story, but it helped them sell a horrifying war. It's a story that is revealed in detail by the Downing Street memo.
States like these constitute an axis of evil.
One last chance to avoid war. The entire world must know that we will take whatever action is necessary.
Hey, we are interrupting the programming for a commercial break. That's how we're able to make videos and get out and see if it has that same effect for you. And again, you can cancel anytime if you feel like it isn't a good
I'm showing you the link.
Fit for you. Thank you, BetterHelp, for sponsoring today's video. And with that, let's get back into it with the Downing Street memo.
It's hey, did the Iraq war, did America and its global war on terror, an $8 trillion operation that caused so much death and destruction, have you feeling down? Go to BetterHelp.com. Get therapy over the phone.
Memo.
On September the 11th, enemies of freedom committed an act of war against our country.
September the 11th.
The United States military has begun strikes against al-Qaeda terrorist training camps in Afghanistan.
Let's start by looking at another document from the fall of 2001, when Deputy Secretary of Defense Paul Wolfowitz created this memo for his boss, Donald Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense. This was just 10 weeks after the attacks that changed the course of history, but this document wasn't about that. It was about Iraq, a country that had nothing to do with 9/11. Rumsfeld reviewed the document before meeting.
Yeah, unlike Afghanistan, which had everything to do with 9/11. Oh, wait, nah, not really, but hey, who knows? I mean, they deserved it, brother. They all did. You know what I mean? Yee.
With an army general. He marked it up with his notes, giving us insight into what the Secretary of Defense of the United States was really thinking about after 9/11. How this group of military leaders were set on, quote, building momentum to topple Iraq's dictator Saddam Hussein, to decapitate the government, a government that was no longer useful to them. Saddam Hussein had been a useful client to the United States, especially in the 80s when he was waging a war against Iran, an enemy of the United States. But those days were now over. Saddam had turned into just a troublemaker in the region, creating instability that could threaten the US's easy access to oil.
2 hours ago, Allied air forces began an attack on military targets in Iraq and Kuwait. This conflict started August 2nd when the dictator of Iraq invaded a small and helpless neighbor.
And in many ways, Iraq was an old mess in need of cleaning up. A mess that Bush Sr. had failed to resolve during the first Gulf War. Iraq was supposed to disarm itself after that war, but had kicked out the UN weapons inspector teams. But that wasn't the main reason why right after 9/11 these guys were talking about invading Iraq. A bigger reason is that these leaders wanted to remind the world who the global superpower was. They needed to, after being brutally attacked on their own soil. A non-US friendly regime like Iraq couldn't be allowed to stand in a post-9/11 world. Or, in the words of Rumsfeld himself, hours after the
No. I mean, that's like that's like spiritual reasons that were allowed for the American eyes to be. No, this is like, I mean, this is crazy. A lot of people are shitting on Adam McKay originally, but calling Adam McKay a fucking lib, but he very openly stated a materialist reason for why we invaded Iraq. I'm sure Johnny will get into that too, because like the Halliburton mention and oil is 1,000,000%, 1,000,000 quintillion percent a well-established American meme at this point. If he doesn't get into that, that is wild, okay?
Towers fell. Quote, we need to bomb something else to show that we're big and strong and not going to be pushed around. Iraq and its leader was that something else.
No, Afghanistan was that something else. Why is he not talking about Afghanistan? Afghanistan was the original something else, which is like they needed targets. They needed military targets. They needed something to bomb so that they could, they had a counter to what was going on. But there was also reasons beyond, even in Afghanistan, why we were looking for. We weren't just looking for targets as vengeance. Okay, the notion that like Iraq and Afghanistan are just simply America getting a little out of hand, as they're engaging in like righteous vengeance is silly. That's not the case at all. Johnny clearly hasn't been listening to Blowback Season 4. I mean, yeah, definitely not. Yeah, saying it was an emotional response is out for the bloodthirsty, imperialist, opportunistic reality. Exactly.
And now Bush and his advisors were looking at a plan to make it a reality. But how to start the war? Could they tie Saddam Hussein to something that Americans feared, like 9/11 or anthrax? Or could they tell a story about weapons of mass destruction? What other countries could they bring in to support their invasion? And of course...
Okay, here's one thing I have to mention here. If America was so interested specifically in like righteous vengeance in Iraq, okay, then immediately in the aftermath of the invasion of Iraq, they would have not secured only one ministry, energy, as opposed to every other fucking area was bombed to bits, okay? I'm sorry. Very, very weird to just only secure the Ministry of Energy and nothing else. I wonder why they did that. Why did they do that? This was before fracking technology, when the U.S. was way more reliant on foreign sources of oil. They would attack Saudi Arabia too. Yeah, they didn't attack Saudi Arabia because Saudi Arabia is our allies. Okay, they're our allies, and they were our allies through this as well, surprisingly.
Of course, the most important consideration, Rumsfeld jots it here at the end, they would need an influence campaign. They would need to sell the war. And when should they begin? How about right away?
Iraq continues to flaunt its hostility toward America and to support terror.
3 months later, the president was telling the world that Iraq was one of a group of evil countries that the U.S. must oppose in the global fight against good and evil.
States like these constitute an axis of evil. The price of indifference would be catastrophic.
By the summer of 2002, this idea that Bush's advisors had scratched down after 9/11 was developing into an official policy. That handwritten influence campaign to sell the war was now in full swing.
There is no doubt that Saddam Hussein now has weapons of mass destruction.
The Iraqi regime has been free to pursue the development of weapons of mass destruction.
We know they have weapons of mass destruction. There isn't any debate about it.
And this is exactly what the head of MI6 told Prime Minister Tony Blair at his house in the summer of 2002 after meeting with the CIA in Washington. It's what we see in the Downing Street memo, that there was a perceptible shift in attitude in Washington, and that the US invasion of Iraq was now seen as inevitable, and that they were now fixing intelligence around a decision that they had already made, and that the US wasn't really planning to work with the UN. They didn't want weapons inspections or getting UN approval for military force. And crucially, the head of the MI6 tells the Prime Minister that these Bush people aren't really thinking much about the aftermath of such an invasion.
Oh man, they just like, again, they're just like silly. They're just angry. Am I crazy? I feel like this video portrays it as just like these guys are simply just like really mad and they wanted to do this because they were really mad and they were out for blood. And it's wrong that they were out for blood, even though like, you know, something really terrible had happened in America. And you know, that's the reason why they decided to take action. And they were just inconsiderate. They were inconsiderate about like the consequences of that. And it's like, yeah, there's truth to there's truth to everything he's saying. It's just that that's not the main reason. And you end up absolutely missing the major reasons as to why America keeps finding itself in fucking war and destabilization plots all the goddamn time. It's very frustrating to like have this kind of perspective on it when like even Republicans understand that is not the reason. That's not the major reason. It's like turned into a meme at this point. Like the classic, oh, is there oil? We'll invade you meme is one that is bipartisan, apolitical. You know what I mean? It's just established fact, well-established fact. I don't really understand it.
What is inevitable is not regime change. It is disarmament of weapons of mass destruction.
This memo wasn't supposed to be seen by anyone but just a few, and that's why we can learn from it. It serves as one of the most potent pieces of evidence that the Bush administration was maneuvering two very different stories. Their private story about the need to remove a dictator to project US power, which was in stark contrast to the public story that they had to tell to sell the invasion, their influence campaign.
Any country on the face of the earth with an active intelligence program knows that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction.
I mean, they just fucking straight up lied about every part of this, and it's weird to just, I don't know, almost lib-wash it. I wouldn't say whitewashing these war crimes, but like lib-washing it. Very odd. I have to pee real bad.
Because they knew that if they were really going to sell this war, they would need to convince not only the American public, but also Congress, and at least partially the international community. What we learn in the Downing Street memo is that they had settled on two main focus points for their story. That Iraq has weapons of mass destruction, and that they're also working with the masterminds of 9/11. Not long after this meeting between MI6 and the CIA, Bush and his allies ramp up their influence campaign to sell their war.
We've learned that Iraq has trained al-Qaeda members in bomb-making, poisons, and deadly gases.
The sales pitches to the American people for an invasion of Iraq were made with absolute certainty. Certainty that Iraq had WMDs.
He had agreed, and the UN had agreed, that he would not have a WMD program. We know he does have one.
Certainty that they wanted to use them against Americans and American allies.
Simply stated, there is no doubt that Saddam Hussein now has weapons of mass destruction.
that he is amassing them to use against our friends, against our allies, and against us.
Certainty that Iraq was harboring terrorists.
And al-Qaeda terrorists escaped from Afghanistan and are known to be in Iraq.
And certainty that Iraq was working on obtaining nuclear weapons.
And Iraq's state-controlled media has reported numerous meetings between Saddam Hussein and his nuclear scientists, leaving little doubt about his continued appetite for these weapons.
And these speeches were working. By the fall of 2002, Americans were in favor of an invasion of Iraq by just a narrow majority. But there was just one problem, that all of these statements were lies. Indeed, this was already known in the secret rooms of Downing Street, that the US was fixing their facts and their intel to match their already made decision. Iraq's supposed links to al-Qaeda were based on one interrogation of a guy whose testimony lacked, quote, specific details, and who was intentionally lying about it to mislead his interrogators. Bush and his allies knew this. It was clearly...
Bro, I'm sorry, but acting like this is, it was simply a war of vengeance when, like, this was written in 2003 is wild to me. Halliburton, the oil services company formerly run by U.S. Vice President Dick Cheney, yesterday reported soaring revenues from its contracts to help rebuild Iraq. The company said sales in the third quarter were 39% higher at $4.1 billion. Iraq-related work transformed the prospects of its Kellogg Brown and Root subsidiary. The division's total revenues increased by 80% to $2.3 billion, of which $900 million came from Iraq, and profits grew fourfold to $49 million, of which $34 million was Iraq's business. Like, this is not about vengeance and, like, decapitating Saddam, okay? Specifically, because we just needed a different target and we needed, like, more targets. Because, like, we satisfied that need in Afghanistan already, okay? It's just, like, ahistorical at this point. Like, this is lib-washing of history to a degree that is literally ahistorical. It's always... And it will always be about the money, not just oil, but also, you know, other material reasons like rebuilding Iraq, like with Halliburton. Like, and the oil meme in and of itself is so well established. It's not just liberals that make that meme and that joke. It's fucking conservatives too.
Documented back in February of 2002, and yet publicly, the scary story about al-Qaeda being in Iraq continued to be sold by Bush and his people.
The Iraqi regime has plotted to develop anthrax, nerve gas, and nuclear weapons for over a decade.
The case for weapons of mass destruction in Iraq was equally thin, and senior officials knew it. Like in September 2002, when Donald Rumsfeld received this report from the Joint Chiefs assessing what real evidence there actually was for WMD in Iraq. The report is shockingly honest, and it says that the conclusion that Saddam has WMD, quote, relied heavily on analytic assumptions and judgments rather than hard evidence. That's word salad for it was speculation and conjecture. The report goes on to say that they didn't have anything solid on nuclear weapons related facilities.
No, hey, but why do you put on Johnny Harris videos when they're so lib-wash is misinforming people on history? They're very well edited. They're still factually correct in many instances, but there's like key omissions in there. And also, I watch fucking Republicans all day. I watch people I disagree with pretty much all day. I go through it and pick apart certain aspects that are omitted that I think are very important to mention that Johnny is not mentioning. That's the whole point.
And concludes that they don't know of any facilities where Saddam may be producing or testing biological weapons. And so we know now that they had almost no evidence for their story about why the US should invade Iraq. And yet, even knowing this, they kept selling the same story, convincing the American people.
There's no doubt in my mind he wants to have a nuclear weapon, and he's got some capacity.
Wherever threats are forming against our country, we will respond.
But they couldn't go on like this forever. They knew that if they were really going to sell this war, they were going to need to show real, convincing evidence, not to the people, but to Congress. And this is where we get another instance of fixing the intelligence to fit the policy. It came in September 2002 when President Bush asked Congress to give him the authority to invade Iraq. In response, Senate leaders requested an immediate national intelligence estimate, which is a report from the entire intelligence community meant to help Congress make informed decisions. This could be
I'm sorry, but like talking about Iraq's nationalized oil production, domestic oil industry, like pre-invasion of Iraq, and what Iraq's oil output looks like now, post 20 years after the invasion of Iraq, is mind-boggling when we're talking about how 9/11 was used to sell a war. And I do think that it's basically, it's like a cowardly way of covering this. It's a cowardly way of covering the story because you always have an out. You could just be like, well, we were just talking about how 9/11 was used to sell a war. I didn't mention the material reasons as to why that war happened. And it's like, I don't get the angle. Like, I don't understand. I don't understand this angle at all because like, this is well-established shit. Completely well-established shit. What? You went over this exact story while reacting to the Vice scene a year ago? Like, this is a better assessment of how fucking Iraq happened. An Adam McKay movie, Vice, which is great, by the way, highly recommended, is like a more honest, like almost documentary on how the Iraq War was sold, justified, happened, why it happened, than anything you're going to see on fucking CBS Morning.
Dick, we've been working with these focus groups and advertising executives to...
We should watch that scene as well, I think. We should watch that scene as well. We should watch that. I wanna watch that scene. Damn, dude, X is on the Queen's eyes over a year. That was my 9/11. This was removed from YouTube. Wait, really? I wonder if it still exists somewhere. Hold on. Let's see if I can find it again. Yeah, no, there is. No, we just watched that one. Wow, that's really interesting. Why the fuck is that scene not in it? I'm sure there's another YouTube link on it, but if you never repeated yourself, the stream would be 1 hour long. I searched for it. Every video has been copy striked. That's so crazy that is copy striked. Like that specific scene. There's so many other fucking long ass scenes, but that one is copy strike. Like what the fuck? Yeah, the focus group one. That one is like the best one. This is literally one of the best sequences from this movie. The real plan was always the top of the hour ad break, which I don't have a creative way to send. I'm just going to run it now. I don't even care. I gave up. You think the focus group, all the anti-trans stuff? They absolutely focus group the anti-trans stuff. I've talked about this before. The original attack against trans people in the aftermath of Obergefell was actually falling on deaf ears. They focus grouped it like psychotic Christian groups. Like family groups that always have a family name in them. Like they always have family somewhere in their names, like Saving American Families or whatever. Originally, they attacked trans people from the angle of like bathrooms and not allowing, trans women in women's restrooms and stuff like that. And there were bills that were passed. Okay. Sold out. What are you, dude? Can you fucking keep schizo posting to a goddamn minimum? Like, can we just do that? Can we please just stop schizophrenic posting in the fucking chat for like one day? I'm doing a full-blown shutdown on all schizo posting, okay? Not on 9/11, please. Anyway, as far as the focus group testing goes, you're 100% on the money. Don't know if you knew that or not, but originally they did the bathroom bills, and those bathroom bills were met with a tremendous amount of backlash. So they went back to the drawing board and focus grouped anti-trans rhetoric to audiences and figured out that it is actually much more prescient if you don't just directly attack trans people, but instead attack trans people as though they are undermining another concept that Americans care about, meritocracy and fairness. They realized that if you talk about trans people in sports, the last bastion of fairness in American existence, the last aspect of meritocracy in the United States of America, where there is something as close to a meritocracy as you possibly can get, then it was a significantly better line of attack. And that's why a lot of the transphobia conversation started revolving around trans girls in sports, okay? Trans teenagers and trans women in sports competing against cis women. And although this was a insanely minuscule, marginal, tiny fucking fraction of a percent of the overall conversation surrounding sports, it became the number one issue for anyone who wanted to make an argument against transphobia. To this day, it is a profoundly successful propaganda talking point, okay? It is very, very successful. I think it's like 60% of Americans believe that trans women should not participate in sports with cis women. That is a fact that a lot of optics-focused libs use when casting aside trans protections. Now, of course, it doesn't even fucking matter because they moved very quickly on from the penis inspection days in middle schools, even though some states actually pushed for bills like that. They did successfully implement penis inspection day bills. Shouts out to Ohio and I believe Kansas, or was it Kentucky? Anyway, and they barred trans girls from participating in sports, even if there was like 3 trans people in all of high school athletics. Okay? They moved away from that very quickly to any kind of trans medical care. First, they tackled trans medical care for minors. Any kind of medical care for trans minors was immediately chastised, immediately fucking cast as like an awful thing. And now they've moved away from that to like complete consensual medical care for trans adults, and even having trans people exist in public. But you have to remember that this entire conversation originally started with the unsuccessful strategy of doing the bathroom bills, which even Donald Trump criticized, by the way. They did it in North Carolina. Everybody criticized North Carolina for trying to push for that. Or was it South Carolina where the bathroom bills? I think it was North Carolina. Regardless, they did it. Everybody criticized it, including Trump, when he was running for president. Trump literally said, leave it as is. Don't fuck around with that. Caitlyn Jenner can piss and shit in whatever bathroom she wants to piss and shit in, as long as she's pissing and shitting in the Trump Tower. He said that. So a lot of the anti-trans rhetoric does not necessarily revolve around the immediate anger and visceral hate that the normal American feels towards trans people existing in society, okay? It's actually more so about the concept of fairness that they believe in their hearts, okay? If you see trans people, a group of individuals that many Americans, the overwhelming majority of Americans, have apathy towards, like they just don't care. They don't give a shit. If they're doing their own thing, people usually don't care. But they are way more susceptible due to being a group of individuals that are at the intersections of marginalization. So they get hit from every avenue, from every angle. They are infinitely more susceptible to counter messaging and counter propaganda from a group of individuals who probably don't think that they've ever met a trans person, don't know a trans person at all, who just kind of think they're kind of weird, right? Normally they would live and let live, but if you're being pumped a shit ton of propaganda from the media that you watch, the outlets that you consume, about how trans people are encroaching on your spaces, they're trying to eviscerate the concept of fairness. They're trying to destroy fairness in sports, something you care about. All of a sudden, that is a infinitely better messaging strategy that you can cut against trans people. This does not mean that there's like, direct, real, unimaginable hatred towards trans people from like every single American. In their hearts, they like constantly are thinking about trans people and how devastating and dangerous trans people are to American society. That's not it. They were conditioned into being fearful of trans people and thinking that trans people are beyond just like weird, okay, an oddity, to directly undermining American meritocracy, okay? Anyway, but they focus group this again. Here's so some of this was featured in the Johnny Harris video as well. And as far as like selling the war, this is what they utilized, which is why I think it's like odd that Johnny Harris is basically rehashing that propaganda by saying that like there were no underlying material reasons as to why a war in Iraq would be quite profitable. and it's just simply a reaction to Americans seeking out a better target for their anger. That was the propaganda that they found as a good way to sell the war in Iraq to the American people. That is not the reason why they attacked Iraq. Does that make sense? Do you understand? I think the JH video is focusing on how it was sold, not why. No, I know. And I think that that is like a relatively cowardly way to broach the subject, especially if you're not talking about like the underlying reasons. You're saying how 9/11 was used to sell a war, fine, but you have to mention why America was interested in going into Iraq. And he personally said in the beginning here that like they were just very mad. They were very mad and they were looking for a target. He even used falsely a Donald Rumsfeld quote when Donald Rumsfeld was talking about Afghanistan and attributed to Iraq. If you don't mention this stuff that like most Americans even understand, I feel like you're omitting key information here.
Be really bad for Bush and his allies. So he and the CIA get hard at work pulling together a report that fits their story, intelligence to back up all their public statements and speeches. They come out with this highly redacted report that they deliver in October of 2002. The report makes some very strong claims. They claim that Iraq has been building more WMD, that they have chemical and biological weapons, and that they will have a nuclear weapon during this decade. And to congressional leaders, this appeared rock solid. Here was the entire intelligence community coming together saying that Iraq had horrific weapons and that they wanted to get more.
Saddam Hussein has composed a scarlet chapter of terror. Our only responsible option is to confront this threat before Americans die.
There is no such thing as a Democrat or Republican war.
So in that same month, based on this report and all of these public speeches, Congress gives the green light for war. But this national intelligence estimate was deeply
God, he's such a good fucking editor. It's crazy. Like his team of editors are so goddamn good. It's crazy.
Flawed. It was a perfect example of the fixed intelligence described in the Downing Street memo. It was put together in less than a month, totally rushed. The report had been plagued by groupthink and directed by political pressure, with the Bush administration pushing analysts to deliver a report that matched their conclusions that they had already come to months earlier. And they did this using very old intelligence. The CIA hadn't had any human assets on the ground for years, so their report wasn't even based off of anything after 1998. But it didn't matter. Bush and his allies had successfully sold the war to Congress and the American people. But there was one last hurdle. It was the international community, which would mean they would have to face the UN process that they apparently had no patience for.
Iraq has answered a decade of UN demands with a decade of defiance.
So it's November 2002, and in response to the rising tensions between Iraq and the US, the UN Security Council passes this resolution, 1441. It was a measure that was meant to give Iraq a final opportunity to comply with weapons inspections, to show the world that they had fully disarmed and had no weapons of mass destruction. Bush and his allies saw this as an opportunity. If they could somehow show that Iraq wasn't complying with this new inspection process, this resolution implied that they would be justified in invading the country. Their long-desired war would be on. But they had a problem, which is that Iraq and Saddam Hussein were complying with the weapons inspections. Over the course of 4 months, UN weapons inspectors searched Iraq from top to bottom. They were led by Hans Blix, the former head of the International Atomic Energy Agency. They conducted over 900 inspections at over 500 locations. And they didn't find anything. No WMD, no biological weapons, no nuclear weapons programs.
Iraq has on the whole cooperated rather well. Access has been provided to all sites we have wanted to inspect: universities, military bases, presidential sites, and private residences.
Hans Blix did find 2 things that were important. First, they did find some ballistic missiles that the UN says have an effective range that makes them illegal, so they would need to be destroyed by Iraq. And second, there were some chemical weapons that the Iraqi regime said cannot be accounted for. But Blix insists that this does not mean that they have these weapons. It just means that they need more time to work out the accounting situation. But this error was exactly what the Bush circle needed to justify their invasion.
I call now on the distinguished Secretary of State of the United States of America.
They sent their most respected cabinet member to the UN, Secretary of State Colin Powell. He came equipped with photos of what he says are mobile weapons facilities.
Saddam Hussein and his regime are concealing their efforts to produce more weapons of mass destruction.
He plays tapes that he says prove that the Iraqis are hiding their weapons.
We evacuated everything to make sure it was not around when the inspectors showed up.
And then he says that this is solid evidence that shows that Iraq is violating the UN resolution that told them to disarm. This whole thing contradicts what the UN weapons inspectors had found in their hundreds and hundreds of inspections. They bulldoze the process and say they have justification to invade.
My colleagues, we have an obligation to see that our resolutions are complied with.
They've got the American public on board, they've got Congress on board, and now the UK is in lockstep.
This is the time for this House to show that we will stand up for what we know to be right, to show that we will confront the tyrannies and dictatorships and terrorists who put our way of life at risk.
The Bush administration...
Someone said, Powell now goes around getting paid to do leadership talks to businesses, and then maybe Mark says, no, he just actually sits in a casket. True. Both of these takes are actually true. Powell did do that, and now he's dead. And he got glazed the fuck up after he died by the media, and they were like, oh, he actually didn't want to do it, and they pushed him because he was the most trustworthy person in the team, and that's why he lied to the entire world about America's false justifications for invading Iraq.
Abandons the UN process, and that March, his people do what they set out to do 18 months earlier, when they were looking for something else to bomb, to show who's really in charge on the world stage.
Yeah, I'm sorry, that is not a good way to, look, that's a key detail that Johnny Harris is mentioning, that they're simply going to Iraq because they are looking for something else to bomb. That's not the case. That is not the case at all. Tony Blair's sister converted to Islam, how ironic in a sense, lol, and I think she did it out of her own volition and not because she married some dude. War is profit, so it kind of is the case. No, the reason why they invaded Iraq was directly due to profit. It wasn't like that they were angry and they were looking for another target. They used the other target, as I'm showing you from Adam McKay's Vice, which, is dramatically reenacting a real thing that happened. The no spin shit when they were looking for ways to justify a war in Iraq, and they were focus group testing it, and people had a lot of appetite for it, specifically because they were like, well, it's a real nation state. You know what I mean? This clip from this entire sequence is a perfect way of summarizing how consent is manufactured when America needs to go to war, wants to go to war to satisfy its appetite for both bloodshed, but more importantly, for endless capital extraction. That is where this comes from. That is the real need, okay? The real interest is profit. Profit for the military-industrial complex is ballooning budgets, okay? And also an opportunity for the government to feed contracts into Dick Cheney's own company for rebuilding Iraq once they bomb the shit out of it, and also destroy the previously nationalized oil extraction industry. The domestic oil manufacturing and extraction in Iraq was nationalized. It's now fully privatized. Okay? And then this is how they lied to the rest of the world. The part that you guys saw, the yellow cake, uranium, the weapons of mass destruction, the mobile setups, mobile sites, which was all a fucking lie, just completely. Anyway, 10 years after Iraq was invaded, Antonia Juhazes wrote this article, Why the War in Iraq Was Fought for Big Oil. 10 years after. It has been 10 years since Operation Iraqi Freedom's bombs first landed in Baghdad. Before the 2003 invasion, Iraq's domestic oil was fully nationalized and closed to Western oil companies. A decade of war later, it is largely privatized and utterly dominated by foreign firms. From ExxonMobil to Chevron to BP and Shell, the West's largest oil companies have set up shop in Iraq. So have a slew of American oil service companies, including Halliburton, the Texas-based firm Dick Cheney ran before becoming George W. Bush's running mate in 2000. The war is the one and only reason for this long-sought and newly acquired access. Oil was not the only goal of the Iraq War, but it was certainly the central one, as top U.S. military and political figures have attested to in the years following the invasion. I will remind you that the only ministry that was protected in the invasion of Iraq was the Ministry of Energy. Okay, the Department of Energy was the only ministry that they protected. Immediately, they had boots on the ground, and they made sure that that was the only department that was left intact. You need to get to the part where they say that in 2003, 70% of Americans believed Iraq was involved in 9/11. Genuine question, why wouldn't they just outright say they wanted profits through oil at the time? Does optics really matter to them that much? What would people do to even stop them? Yes. You can't justify sending hundreds of thousands of fucking American men and women. You literally have to still sell it. You have to sell it. Optics do matter to a certain degree. The American war machine will keep operating in the way that it wants to, but they still have to sell it. They still have to sell it. They sell it in every aspect, unless it's something that it's something that people don't even consider and think about, like operations in Africa, for example. And they sell it very well. They sell it very, very well. That's why so many people still to this day look at you like you're crazy if you say anything that is a little out of pocket in regards to America's military operations. There's plenty of people who still think America is world police, and that's a good thing. And their interest is genuine, and their cause is just. We are American, and the false view of this country that most people have is that we are the good guy on the world stage. Yeah, we can't just openly admit we invade for profit and control. That breaks the American propaganda. Absolutely. My stepdad came out of the Iraq War over 100% disabled. I grew up without a father because of these people. Yeah, can you imagine? Like, oh yeah, sorry, you did that because military contractors needed to turn a profit, and people in positions of power saw that there was, ripe opportunity for mineral and resource extraction, oil extraction specifically. That's why your stepfather is like, eating out of a straw for the rest of his life. I have very smart friends, very progressive, who were duped by the propaganda at the time. Zoomers got to recognize how pervasive it was. It was everywhere. Everything stepping out of line had serious social and job consequences, 100%. Those of us who marched against this shit took a lot of shit from it and I was insulated from most of it anyway, being in college. Yeah. 100%. There was no fucking criticizing the American war machine for a very long time. And think about it this way. There's bipartisan support in Congress for increasing the military discretionary funding year over year. It's the one aspect of our endless budgets that never gets called into question at all. Now, obviously, certain elements of that are always getting hit with austerity. It's the healing side of it, Veterans Affairs, and like what you actually do with the veterans after they're fucking, after they've sold their body to the American war machine and got fucked up permanently, That part, that always gets hit with austerity, but there's never a question about increasing the military budget, ever. There's a reason for that, because there's a healthy appetite for it. Everybody considers it important. Clear Channel had pro-war rallies around the country. Yeah, ironic when you consider what they've become. But yeah, I love that a lot of you are putting the chicken after the egg here. Why do they need, or you're literally saying why they do this propaganda. Why do they need wars to justify giving money to weapons manufacturers when it seems no one pushes back on that anyway? That's what I'm trying to explain to you, man. The reason why no one pushes back on it is because of this fucking propaganda. Propaganda that directly corresponds to the material needs of a liberal capitalist democracy is going to be incredibly powerful. Our institutions are designed to make you feel like these are necessary things that we're doing. That's the point. you look around and you go, I don't even get it. Why do you even need propaganda at this point? Right? Because like it just works. The war machine keeps running, right? And it's like, no, this is the reason why. Because they have a very successful multi-billion-dollar machine that finds new targets and justifies America's actions against said new targets. Vilification of the enemy, instilling a sense of patriotism and making it work every single time. These outcomes were by design, the result of a decade of the U.S. government and oil company pressure. In 1998, Kenneth Durr, the CEO of Chevron, said, Iraq possesses huge reserves of oil and gas reserves I'd love Chevron to have access to. Today it does. In 2000, Big Oil, including Exxon, Chevron, BP, and Shell, spent more money to get fellow oilmen Bush and Cheney into office than they'd spent on any previous election. Just over a week into Bush's first term, their efforts paid off when the National Energy Policy Development Group, chaired by Cheney, was formed, bringing the administration and oil companies together to plot our collective energy future. In March, the task force reviewed lists and maps outlining Iraq's entire oil productive capacity. In March, this is before 9/11. This is after Cheney was elected as vice president, where they had literal maps of Iraq's entire oil productive capacity. Planning for a military invasion was soon underway. Bush's first Treasury Secretary Paul O'Neill said in 2004, already by February 2001, the talk was mostly about logistics, not the why to invade Iraq, but how and how quickly. In its final report in May 2001, the task force argued that the Middle Eastern countries should be urged to open up areas of their energy sectors to foreign investment. This is precisely what has been achieved in Iraq. Okay? Here's how they did it. The State Department's Future of Iraq's Project Oil and Energy Working Group met from February 2002 to April 2003 and agreed that Iraq should be open to international oil companies as quickly as possible after the war. This is before the war in Iraq. This is post 9/11 now and before the war in Iraq. The list of the group's members was not made public, but Ibrahim Bahar al-Aloum, who was appointed Iraq's oil minister by the U.S. occupation government in September 2003, was part of the group. According to Greg Mutit, a journalist and author of Fuel on the Fire, Oil and Politics in Occupied Iraq, Bahar al-Aloum promptly set about trying to implement the group's objectives. What was that about resource maps? Oh, that's the Afghanistan one. Pete Buttigieg has a huge resource and mineral map of Afghanistan on the wall of his living room. Anyways, I'm sure his work on economic stabilization in war zones while at McKinsey and in naval intelligence before that was totally above board and 100% ethical. Yeah. As a separate one. Bush tried to pull that addicted to oil bullshit late in his administration like he wasn't responsible for furthering that addiction. Letter to the Gingrich and Lott on Iraq in 1998. On January, Mr. Speaker and Senator Lott, on January 26, we sent a letter to President Clinton expressing our concern that the U.S. policy on containment of Saddam Hussein was failing. The result, we argued, would be that the vital interests of the United States and its allies in the Middle East would soon be facing a threat as severe as any we had known since the end of the Cold War. We recommend a substantial change of the direction of U.S. policy. Instead of further futile efforts to contain Saddam, we argued that the only way to protect the United States and its allies from the threat of weapons of mass destruction was to put in place. This is 1998. Spoiler alert in the chat for some of you fucking annoying little shits. Okay? Man, is it really hard to talk about the OG 9/11? Yeah, dude. Mr. America Deserved 9/11 is afraid of talking about fucking Chile. Like, yeah. Yeah, you're right, dude. I'm terrified of talking about the original 9/11. Like, what are you, crazy? Of course I'm going to talk about it. Just wait. I've talked about it a million times, dude. What do you mean? In February, the Clinton administration embraced the agreement between the UN Secretary Kofi Annan and the Iraqi government on February 23rd. The American people need to be made aware of the consequences of this capitulation of Saddam. We will have suffered an incalculable blow to American leadership and credibility. The administration will unnecessarily put U.S. troops at risk in the Persian Gulf with weapons of mass destruction and also chemical weapons and biological weapons, some of which we gave to Iraq, by the way. Who wrote this? Elliot Abrams, William J. Bennett, Jeffrey Bergner, John R. Bolton, Paula Dobriansky, Francis Fukuyama, Robert Kagan, Zalmai Khalilzad, William Crystal, Richard Pearl, Peter Rodman, Donald Rumsfeld, William Schneider Jr., Vin Weber, Paul Wolfowitz, R. James Woolsey, and Robert B. Zellick. That's interesting. So in 1998, you mean to tell me that these guys were talking about attacking Iraq? Huh. How did that happen? It's crazy that so many of those people I just mentioned directly were involved in the invasion of Iraq. Huh. That's odd. That's odd, man. Anyway, but Bill Kristol apologized, so he's fine, right? Every single one of these dudes should be in jail, okay? The ones that are not dead. The ones that are dead already, God sorted it out, you know what I mean? They're in fucking hell. They're burning. Odd to me that a lot of this stuff doesn't get coverage in the Johnny Harris video talking about, you know, how 9/11 was utilized as a means to invade Iraq, without talking about why we invaded Iraq to begin with. Am I crazy? I feel like he's done a video on Iraq before. Like, why is this video not featuring that aspect of it?
My fellow citizens, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger. America faces an enemy who has no regard for conventions of war.
He dismissed
Why
oil.
did the U.S.
Wait, wait, did I watch this?
Clear very soon amongst intelligence and counterterrorism people that Al-Qaeda was behind it. This terrorist group that was mainly based in Afghanistan. Kilometers away. What the hell is this guy talking to do with this about the PM? Who of Iraq's people live either way up here, where what George Bush wanted and felt like he needed, and it turns out what a lot of American lawmakers also wanted, was a clear, decisive target. Not to try to...
Where's the fucking oil part? 42 minutes long, 452,000 views.
And they give us weapons.
Foreign enemies like Venezuela, which the Democratic country, right? I mean, that would literally... Fascist Latin American death squads. Like, there's just... You're crazy, dude. You're a crazy guy. It sounds like, where's your tinfoil hat, dude? What? I didn't learn about this in school, so it must not be real.
And told him to hush up with all the anti-American holy war talk. So Osama finds
the guy that facilitated that would never in a million years get pardoned by the president and then end up, I don't know, being put in charge of one of the most significant, one of the most influential lobbies in the fucking country, right? I mean, that would literally never happen, right? Or maybe the guy that participated in the cover-up wouldn't currently be sitting in the Trump administration years later as the czar of dealing with America's foreign enemies like Venezuela, which the Democratic parties, like senators, have openly admitted we failed on doing a coup d'etat, on just a soft coup d'etat, just a light one, in public. And both parties have the same foreign policy interests. That would never happen. That's a conspiracy. That's crazy, dude. Can I say something? That man surely, now this is an old video. This is from September 16th, 2020. Okay? That man surely, that I'm speaking of, would have no role in the Biden administration, right? I mean, please. There's no way that man, I mean, this is a Trump guy. I mean, Trump did this because he's bad and wrong, and American foreign policy is not bipartisan. I mean, come on. No fucking way, right? I will reveal the answer behind the paywall. Because at the top of the hour, there's a 3-minute ad break. There it is. Okay? And if you no longer want to see those ads, all you need to do is subscribe for $5 or free with a Twitch Prime by connecting your Amazon Prime account to your Twitch account, where you get 1 free Prime subscription a month. Use it on your favorite broadcaster. Hopefully that's me. You can also get gifted a sub if you want to see the future telling and most consistent streamer on the planet. reveal the truth about, oh my God, wait, what is that article? Biden to nominate Elliot Abrams, who lied over Iran-Contra to a key panel? Wait, what? No. What? I thought things were going to be different, dude. What the fuck? Wait. No. How does this guy keep getting fucking... How does he keep getting positions, dude? At this point, it's a fuck you, okay? At this point, it's a fuck you. It's a fuck you to everybody. What are you going to do about it? It's a bipartisan panel. He had to nominate a Republican choice. Yeah, there's no other guy. This is the guy. This is the guy you got to put over there. That's so funny. Dude, I love you, man. I love the fucking Brandon defenders here. Jesus Christ, dude. He lied about El Mozote, the largest massacre in modern Latin American history, in which 800 plus civilians were murdered by the Salvadoran government, the majority of whom were civilian. They literally fucking would go into homes where there was just women and babies, and they would pike babies on their bayonets, okay? American-trained militias, for the record. American military-trained militias. They would throw babies up in the fucking air and put a fucking bayonet through the babies. Now, you know, that's just the guy, right? He's just the guy who worked hard to hide that. Just saying, dude. Just the guy. Keeps getting promoted into positions of power. How does that keep happening? How does that keep happening? Well, maybe it's just that we're supposed to be doing these things. So, of course, he's going to get promoted because he's doing his job. Because his position dictates he does things like that. You know? He's supposed to do things like that. It is.
War in Iraq.
Let's get started.
In the early stages of military...
Which is very interesting. Very weird. Including ISIS in the region for a very long time.
You know, 9/11 was a pretty sophisticated attack. There's no way that this ragtag terror group of Al-Qaeda could have pulled it off all alone. They probably had help from Saddam in Iraq. And then Wolfowitz says that when it comes to global terrorism, Saddam is actually the head of the...
By the way, the irony is, like, now they're literally doing it with Iran. Well, they did it with Iran back then as well, which is hilarious because Iran literally helped the American intelligence communities fight against Al-Qaeda and the Sunni rebel groups that propped up in the aftermath of the destabilization in the region. And they have fought back against the... He's still in contact with the Hasanabi guy. So I guess he did also say back then that the Iraq war was reductive to point to just simply oil. And then, you know, a couple of years later, he just straight up saying that he just straight up fucking doesn't even mention it. So it does seem like his goal was, you know, his goal has become more apparent to me, at least, that like, oh no, it was just simply, you know, these guys were very angry and bloodthirsty, and that's why they went to war. It's like he's allergic to fucking. It's like he's allergic to the underlying material reasons as to why America goes to war. You know what I mean? It's crazy. Justice seeking America's narrative, fuckhead Harris. No. To be fair, he is saying that, like, the Iraq war is bad. So on that front, we are in agreement. It's just that he's presenting it in a way that I find objectionable because it's so, like, the key details as to why America went, like, maybe I'm nitpicking, I don't know, but I feel like if you look at this situation, if you look at a situation like this and refuse to mention material reasons as to why the Iraq war was being pushed for by the very same people that then got into a position of power and literally fucking did it, oil being a major, playing a major role here, just like every other aspect of American imperialism. Natural resources are always at play. I don't know if it's nitpicking on my end or if I'm just like angry that I feel like he's lying by omission. Does that make sense? It feels like he's lying by omission, like pointing to like how 9/11 was used to sell a war would be great if you're talking about the Iraq War, if you cover the many concerted efforts as to by the very same people who lied and sold the Iraq War to the American population, and the many years prior to 9/11 where they were trying to do that very same thing,
Or rules of morality.
Bush's war took the life of an estimated 500,000 Iraqis and thousands more who fought for their country. And over the course of a decade occupying Iraq, no weapons were found, no nuclear facilities.
Like, he literally said the Iraq War was bad and it was wrong and it was sold to us with a lie. And he basically fucking stated that the major reasons as to why they were so horny to fucking invade Iraq was because they were looking for real targets, which is crazy. No, they were looking to invade Iraq before 9/11. They were always looking to invade Iraq because Iraq's domestic oil production was nationalized. Okay? The military targets made perfect cover for that invasion. That's why Iraq had nothing to do with fucking 9/11, and America, as you describe in this fucking video, like patched it together.
Labs. In fact, it seemed like Iraq had dismantled its nuclear program back in 1991 and the rest of its chemical and biological weapons just a few years later. After the invasion, the U.S. never allowed the UN inspectors back into the country to help with their search. The U.S. would never find a way to link the Iraqi regime to Al-Qaeda or to anthrax. Colin Powell, the Secretary of State...
This video is not from over 2 years ago, for the record. This video is the new one. In his old video, he literally also hand waves away the oil narrative in the first 30 seconds.
Who played a major...
Iraq nationalized their oil in 1972, not 2000. You are also ignorant. Explain to me where in the history of this broadcast did I ever say Iraq nationalized their oil in 2000 and that's why they invaded? How could they have predated this invasion in 1998 if you think that I think that Iraq nationalized their oil extraction industry in 2000? I think you're confusing it with Iran, okay? Because Iran was moving to nationalize their oil refineries and their oil industry, and then a coup happened, okay? But I never, ever mentioned that Iraq nationalized their oil in 2000. You just made that up, you fucking donkey. I never mentioned that. I never said that. Are you that desperate to fucking catch me off guard or something? Like, oh, I caught you, you're wrong. Well, you're not, but I just made something up. Why would I have mentioned the appetite for literally invading Iraq predating 2000?
Major role in selling this war to the international community, would later say that he regrets his part in starting the war.
Deeply regret that some of the information I presented, which was multi-source, was wrong.
Hans Blix, the chief weapons inspector for the UN, would comment later that year that it is sort of fascinating that you can have 100% certainty about weapons of mass destruction and zero certainty about where they are. We may never know what was in the heart and minds.
You think that 9/11 was a false flag instigated by nationalization that didn't happen in 2000? Yeah, I have never said that. Iraq was giving all of its oil to the West through the UN program. The Americans just wanted to profit from the sale of that oil, so the invasion makes sense in that way. I mean, in many ways.
Of these senior leaders, whether they truly believed their own lies, whether they felt justified in the choices they made. But what we can learn from this story is how these leaders behaved when they thought no one was watching, when they thought they could tell a compelling story.
Are these wars then ordered from the oil companies? Brother, what do you mean? It is the oil company. Dick Cheney was the fucking CEO of Halliburton. Like, There is no more Bushes. The Bush family is oil family as well. Like, they literally have connections to the oil industry. This is an oil dynasty we're talking about. These are direct oilmen that got into positions of power specifically so they could do the bidding of the oil and gas industry. Professional drunk drivers, too. Exactly. That is also true. Very true. Both Dick Cheney and George W. Bush were arrested for drunk driving. Well, actually, I don't know if Dick Cheney ever was arrested for drunk driving. I know he used to drunk drive, though. I think he was arrested. I know Bush was. The opiates as well. I knew someone who guarded those fields for 2 years. Okay, we're talking about Afghanistan and opiate production in Afghanistan, which suspiciously was only making its way to Europe and never to America. America's opiates always come from Mexico and by way of China. It's just that, like, it's odd that, like, the Afghan opium production was supplying the entirety of the continent of Europe with heroin. Never America, probably because it's too far, I think. Well, how does that come from China then? Who knows? Okay. I mean, Mexico's closer. Yeah, what about China? Is China closer? But weird that, weird how that worked out for, our, military resources being used in a great way. Weren't Bush Sr. and Bin Laden brother previously business partners? Wait, what? I don't know about that. China literally has towns in America. True, they do have Chinatown. And they do have police departments in America. That's true. Technically closer to China, to continental U.S. than Afghanistan. George W. Bush moves D from Connecticut to Compton, California, where he opened up a store for distributing oil, drilling, and pipeline parts. And then after several years, they moved to Abilene, Texas, I believe. I know this because I used to be an oil pipeline engineer, and they actually work with the Bush family in securing contracts for the Los Angeles Canal flood system, as well as oil drilling all around Los Angeles.